Hi, my name is Stuart Lynch, and in this video I'd like to share with you some things that were either deprecated or added in iOS 17, but are too small to warrant an entire video on their own. So I've combined a number of these for this video, and you may learn something else too that might help in your projects. I love getting your feedback, so tap the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video and leave a comment below. Make sure you subscribe to the video and ring that bell to get notifications of new videos. And if you want to support my work, you can buy me a coffee. There is a starter project for this video, and I encourage you to download it from the link in the description so that if you work along with me, you'll have a completed code project that you can refer back to in the future should you wish to implement these in your own projects. Currently there are 4 views, and they're all presented through this tab view at the start. This tab view is only here should you wish to run the app on your device or in the simulator. We'll be doing all of our previewing in the canvas. I also have a header view modifier here that just allows me to add the description at the top of each view so that we know what's being covered. The first thing that I want to point out is a deprecated view modifier that I actually missed in one of my earlier iOS 17 videos, and that's the foreground color that has now been deprecated. Instead, we need to use ForegroundStyle, which takes any shape style, so we can choose a color here like red. Now if you option click on red and then open in the developer documentation, we see that red is just a static property for a shape style, which is a color or pattern to use when rendering a shape. So that's why red works here. For those of you who have been around SwiftUI since the beginning, you'll know that a container could not have any more than 10 subviews. We had to use another container like a group or another VStack to ensure that we kept our number of views within that limit. Well, in iOS 17 and macOS 14, this limit has been removed. I have no problem adding an 11th text view here, and there are no issues and no errors thrown. Also new this year is the ability to use statements as expressions. For example, let me create a state property called randomNum that'll be an integer initialized as 1. Then for the action of our button, I want to randomly be able to switch between 1 and 2 so that I can update that property, that randomNum, when I click on the button. So I'm just going to use a randomNum being able to int random in the range of 1 through 2 inclusively. So now within the body, I want to create a constant that will be a different color depending on that value. Now in iOS 17, we can do all of that as an expression using an if-else statement. So if random is equal to 1, then within the curly brackets or braces, color.red. I'm returning color.red. Else will return color.blue. It's simply an if-else statement, all on the same line as an expression. Now I can change my foreground style to that selected color. Now when I tap on the button, the color will change depending on the value generated in the button's method. Now you might be suggesting that I could have used a ternary operator here for that foreground style, and this is true. But what if there are more than just 2 cases? It gets pretty ugly when that happens. So for example, let's change our randomNum to go from 1 through 4 inclusively. This means that I'll need more colors. And even this if-else statement will get more complicated as I'll need an if, else if, else if, else. So this is better suited to a switch statement. And we can now use switch on random color as well. And then for each of the cases, I can choose a different color. So I'll add red and blue as cases 1 and 2. And then for case 3, I'll use a color green. And then the default, the catch-all, will be our color orange. Now tapping on that button, I'll switch between one of those colors whenever that changes. Now the last thing I want to cover in this view is the change to the onChange method. Previously, by default, you only had access to the new value when something changes. But now with SwiftUI, you get both the old and the new values. So in this case, let me print out the old value, then the new value. If I bring up the console and check the preview printout, when I tap on the button then, and there has been a change, I get both the old and the new values displayed. This might come in pretty handy if I want to maintain the previous and the new value. What you may not also know though is that there's one more overload for this method, and that is not to have any arguments in the closure at all. So instead of using an underscore to ignore the values, we can just leave them out entirely, and then just print out something like something has changed. Now, if you want to use only one of the arguments, though, you'll still need to use an underscore for the other one to ignore it. It's none or both. But in this case now, we only get a print if something is changed. In this second view, I have a rectangle and an image using an image from my asset folder. The foreground color has to change, as we've just learned, so I'll do that shortly, but I want to create my own unique color. And notice that image is using a string, Noble Ridge, which is a winery I visited earlier in the summer in the Okanagan wine region of British Columbia, where I live. What is nice now in iOS 17 is that Xcode will symbolize custom colors and images that are in our asset folder. Let me show you. Let me open the asset folder and create a new color set. I'm going to call it Violet, and for the sake of discussion, I'm going to use a capital V. Let me open the inspector and set the appearance to none, and I'm going to apply a universal color, no matter if it's light or dark mode. I'll select the color and make sure that the content is set for sRGB, and then I can enter a hex value for the color violet, which is 7F00FF. And while we're at it, notice here that Noble Ridge, the image, is two words, both capitalized, and then there's another one called Launch Screen. Let me return to part 2 and change the foreground color to ForegroundStyle. For the style, when I enter a period, you'll find now that violet, not capitalized, is one of our choices now, and it indicates that violet is an asset catalog color. For the image, I'm going to remove the string, but like the style, I'll enter a period, and we'll see both launch screen and the symbolized version of Noble Ridge that has been converted to camel case, so we can choose it. Fantastic. No more misspelling of my assets. We've always been able to apply ClipShapes to our views, but prior to iOS 17, we had to use the full struct name if we were going to apply one of our standard ones. For example, if we wanted to clip our image to the shape of a circle, we would have had to done ClipShape and then use the struct circle. Well, now Xcode has symbolized some of these into static properties, so we can now simply use .circle or .capsule, or there's an ellipse or a rect. Well, code completion will let me find them, but if you're wondering what the complete list is, you can option click on one of them to see it's a static property, and then you can back up one more level to find all of the different options. One of these is this rect, where we can provide a different radius for each of our corners. And if we drill down, we see that the default values are 0 for each of the different corners, and we can change one or more of these at our leisure. And there's a default style that is continuous. So let me go back now and then replace this capsule with a .rect. And then I'll hold down the Option key to get all of the properties. And I'm going to use Control-M to separate them onto separate lines. I love this feature in Xcode 15. Now I'm going to set the top leading radius to 145, the bottom radius to 45, and the bottom trailing radius to 145. But I'm going to remove the top trailing radius because I'll let it go to the default of 0, and I'll leave the default value for style being continuous, so I can just remove those two arguments. Well, that's cool. But there's also a new shape that is an uneven rounded rectangle that allows me to do the same thing instead of just using this rectangle. So let me choose one of these. And then again, I'll use Control-M to separate onto separate lines. But I'm only going to provide the radii for the first 3 arguments as I did before, and leave the default values for the last 2, the top trailing and the style. I'm going to go with 65 for the top leading radius, bottom leading radius will be 20, and bottom trailing radius will be 65. Well, this is going to allow me to create and put together some pretty fancy shapes that I'll be able to use in my projects. This year we got a new style of picker. We've had pickers like inline, segmented, wheel, and menu. And this year we got palette picker style. So let me show you how to implement this by replacing this button with a picker that's going to allow me to pick from one of the colors that I've got here in my enum My Colors. This My Colors enum currently has 6 cases representing most of the colors in the rainbow. I'm missing one, however, and that's violet. But since we've added that to our asset, we can use that symbolized version for our case. So we'll add a case of .violet is going to return the color .violet. Now I see also that this string has an enum raw value that is case iterable and identifiable. So I can use the all cases array for a for each loop to provide the options for my picker. So let me replace the button with a picker where the selection is the selected color. And then I can now use that for each loop to iterate over each of the colors that will provide me with that iterator that I will call my color. So my color has a raw value and it also has a color. So I can create a label where the label is the my color's raw value. And the image is going to be a system image, and I will use the square SF symbol. Now there is no need to specify a tag here because by default it will be the my color iterator unless otherwise specified. Well, this is not quite what I want though. I don't even see the square symbol image. I want to replace this new picker style and use the palette picker style. Wait a minute, this isn't what I want. This is a segmented picker. But if I option click on the picker style though, I'll see why. We get this notice that when used outside of menus, this style is rendered as a segmented picker. So let's embed this picker in a menu, and I'll use a title key that will be the selected color's raw value. Now this gives me a bunch of squares, and if I guess correctly, I can click on one that'll change the color. However, each time the squares are all the same color, and that's the current selected color. Since I've applied that tint to the entire menu, I have stylized all of the buttons inside our menu as well as the button itself, or as well as the menu itself. So let me override that tint color for each one of our labels as well by applying the My Colors computed color property as the label's tint. Well, this is better because I see the different colors, but that selection is kind of strange. It gets highlighted each time I select one. Well, there's another modifier that I can apply though, since I have used a label with a system image. And new in iOS 17, I can apply a symbol variant that will get applied to all of the items in my container. So I'm going to apply a symbol variant of .fill. Well, this is looking better right now because I see all of the ones are filled, but I still don't know which one is the selected item. Well, that's because I only want the fill to be applied to the selected palette. So instead of using this entire symbol variant of .fill on the entire for each group, I'm going to use the new palette selection effect modifier and pass in the symbol variant of .fill. So only the selected item will get that symbol variant. Now this is looking better. Only the selected square is filled. Perfect. Or is it? I just selected that last square and it's showing indigo. I thought I added violet. Well, let me look again. It looks like there are only 6 squares when I should have 7. Well, it turns out that you can scroll that palette to the right if there are more than 6. If I do that, I find violet, and I can choose it. For this final view, I'm going to have some fun. What I want to be able to do is to apply some contrast and a color multiplier to this image. And for the color, I want to use that same color palette that I used in the last view. I also want to be able to clear the contrast and the color multiplier if I want. So I'll need 3 state properties. The first one to track our selected color that I'll initialize as the myColor.red enum instance. Next, for contrast, it'll be a double value, and I'll initialize it as 1. And then thirdly, a Boolean for clear if I want to remove the color and contrast, and I'll initialize that as false. Now I think the best way to deal with this is to create a view modifier to this image that will change based on the properties that we've just created. So outside of our view here, I'm going to create a struct called WithModifiers that will be a view modifier. This is going to require a body function that will receive the content that we can manipulate and return some view. Now I want to pass in the 3 values for our state properties so that I can add these now. One will be selected color, which will be my colors. One for contrast, which will be the double, and the other clear, the Boolean value. So then in the body, if we want to manipulate our content, if it's clear, we'll use an if clause, we'll simply just return the content as is. Else though, we'll want to take that content, which will be our image, and apply a color multiplier method and pass in the selected color. And then similarly, we can set the contrast by passing in the value of the contrast. If creating this view modifier is new to you, I recommend that you watch my video on that topic. I'll make sure to leave a link in the description. Now, I can also create an extension for the view here as well to make it more Swifty, but I'm not going to do that. I'm simply going to go back to my image and apply the modifier method as is, and then pass in our new WithModifiers method that has those 3 properties, and I'll use again Control-M to separate out those arguments for clarity, and then I'm just going to pass in all of our state property values. Right away now then, you see that image take on a red color multiplier. The contrast is still going to be set at 1. Well, I can change the colors and the contrast manually for our state properties, and I get to see how it changes the effect of our image. Now let me revert back to the original values and let's code some way to allow us to choose it. And I'm going to do this by way of a context menu, which means if I can long press on the image, I'll be presented with a menu of choices. Well, one is going to be a palette of colors, and the other is going to allow me to change the contrast level. So first, let's create the context menu. And then for the contrast, I want that at the top. I'm going to create a slider that's going to be bound to the contrast in a range of 0.5 up to and including 3.0, and make sure that I include a label. That label is a trailing closure, so I can tighten this up a bit and place the text view here right with the word contrast, but also display the contrast value as an interpolated string, but use the format of number. Now, if I long press on the image, I can change the contrast. Well, we created that picker in our previous view, and I want to use it here. So let me just go back for the sake of argument and copy that picker from our previous view. And since our selected value is selected color in both cases, we should just now be able to come back and paste that picker into our context menu. Now I can long press and change the color and the contrast, but there's not yet any way to remove all of the modifiers, and that's why I created that clear Boolean value. Well, in iOS 17, we can now use a control group in a context menu. So why not use one here for two buttons that can turn on or off the application of our modifiers by toggling that Boolean value. And our view modifier then will simply either present the content or the content with the modifiers. So first, I'll create a control group. And then for the first button, I'll have an action that will set clear to true. And then the label will be a label with the title clear, but use a symbol image of x.circle. Well, let me copy this button then to create the second one. And I'll set as the action clear to false. I'll change the label to apply, and then I'll just simply use the system image of a check mark. Now, as I long press, I can see my control group that will allow me to add or remove these modifiers. Well, there's one last modifier that I can apply to this control group, and that is to set the control group style to compact menu. Now our labels are removed, and it's nice and compact, and hopefully those system images will let people know what were intended. Well, that's it for another video in this iOS 17 and WWDC 23 series. I hope you've learned something in this video that you'll be able to apply to your own projects. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment. This helps drive more people to my channel. Be sure to ring the bell and subscribe as well so that you get notified when new videos are released. Thanks for watching.